So here we are up to the Pierce Brosnan era, and we're obviously starting with GoldenEye.
Yes. This is the modern era for me, I would consider,
Yeah, I would too. It was a reinvention of Bond in many ways, not just because it was a new Bond, but kind of very, very different look and feel to Bond. And again, I had a video game with this one, which the other Bonds didn't seem to. I could be mistaken, but I think it was the only one that did come out. But it was. I'm not really into computer games, but I think it was quite a big thing, and people still reference it to this day. Yeah, GoldenEye. Yeah, I remember thinking, yeah, okay, this is now an updated Bond. It's much more like a sort of mid-90s action film, but still had a lot of the Bond um, sort of Bond-esque things. Although I think the thing that disappointed a lot of people, me a little bit, was it's this era of Bond where BMW had kind of sponsored
Sure.
Bond. So now his car is a German BMW.
Now Ethan Hawke, I mean not Ethan Hawke, Ethan Hunt is a BMW driver. All the Mission Impossible movies have that contract now. So it's fun to watch movies actually seeing the contract, because you're like, if you watch Marvel movies, everyone only drives Audis. And if you watch, if you watch Mission Impossible movies now, they only drive BMWs. But in the 90s, James Bond drove a BMW.
Yeah.
But in the 70s, James Bond drove a Lotus, not an Aston Martin. So it's like just seeing who has the contracts for things. And the Transformers, they're only American cars, So
that's true. Yes, and I remember going back briefly. One of the reasons, from what I heard, I think it's true, but it may not be 100% true. But the story I heard why they switched to Lotus Express compared to the previous Aston Martins was Lotus. Someone at Lotus knew where the Broccoli production crew were meeting and having sort of pre talks, and they were like, we want the Lotus to be the next James Bond car because it looked sort of futuristic and everything. So they took a prototype of the Spree and parked it outside of the offices, like Pinewood maybe, where they were meeting. And obviously they came out and go, well, what's this car? We want to find it. And they're like, oh, it's a Lotus. Let's get Lotus on the phone. And yeah, clearly it was featured in several films. But yeah, so Pierce Brosnan. Yeah, is he Bond to you?
Well, I mean, Daniel Craig is still my James Bond. I was 13 when Casino Royale came out. So I already like Bond, and I'd seen some of the older films, and I'd seen the Pierce Brosnan films, and I'd like Pierce Brosnan. So he is my Bond as a kid. But I mean, Daniel Craig's definitely one I've seen the most, the one I've lived the longest with, and more my type of films. But I think Pierce Brosnan might be, and it depends on like the best James Bond. And I mean that in a certain way, as up until, I mean, not counting the Daniel Craig films, but I feel like Pierce Brosnan, his films don't match him. I think he somehow is able to channel every single Bond. Like, I think he has some of that Sean Connery flair and charm, but he has the humor and one-liners of Roger Moore, but he can play the serious sternness of Timothy Dalton. And I really do feel like what I really appreciate this time watching Pierce, what I thought was, what? I think more than any other actor, at least up until that point, you could have put Pierce Brosnan in any film and it would have worked. Like, if you could put Pierce Brosnan in Goldfinger, I think he could have made that work. He could fit that story and make it work. But I think if you put him in Spy Who Loved Me or Moonraker, I think he could make that work. Obviously, like, he did Die Another Day and other stuff. And I think the same thing where, like, because he almost did play the Timothy Dalton role. They almost casted him before. He just couldn't.
Yeah.
I think he could have easily played both of those movies as well. So it's like, I think there's a certain range as an actor. I think maybe he has the widest range of the Bond actors before, where I think he literally could have done any of the Bond scripts at any point in time and succeeded at it. So I give an appreciation to him in that regard there. And GoldenEye for me, again, is return to form. Like, it's like a classic Bond film again. It is 90s movie, but it's got the pre-title, it's got the classic Bond villain, it's got the layers, it's got the locations, it's got the cards playing, it's got the women, it's got the names. What's her what's her on a top, it's got
Yeah.
it's got all of the hallmarks of James Bond, right in the beginning, the first time you meet him, he's getting with the girl in champagne, but it doesn't it feels like slightly classy. It's still like he's still hooking up with girls, but it doesn't feel like he's abrasive or abusive or manipulative in a different type of non-charming type of way. No, I'm a big fan. Also, last thing is this starts, and they go into, for better or worse, this is what they do in the Craig films, maybe too strongly. I think these films do it too lightly, but they had the right idea. I think maybe GoldenEye hits the mark right when people like that is, Bond films lack emotion in a certain sense, which you get when you do something serialized, because you're not going to have big character arcs and you're not going to have a story continuing. But, this film gives you Alex Trebek, is that his name? They gives you his what do you call it? He's like his brother, right? He's like, he, quote unquote, they call each other, they're friends because he was 006. So basically, by having a relationship with the villain, you're adding this extra level of depth and this extra level of emotion throughout the story that they try to give it throughout them. And Tomorrow Never Dies, Terry Hatcher's his ex-lover. In the third film, Worlds Is Not Enough, it's obviously the girl he's falling in love with is actually the villain of the film, which is the twist. And then in Die Another Day, which doesn't really have much, supposed to be like he was captured and they let him there to die, and he doesn't need the job anymore and he's a relic. And so it tries to deal with these themes, but just too lightly. And I think what they're going to do later on, they're skipping ahead past No Time to Die, I think try the Brosnan era again in a way. And what I mean by that is like, more serialized stories, but focusing on having still somehow an emotional depth to each story, but going a little more grand. But that's just how I feel about Brosnan as a whole as an actor and how he was Bond. I think he was a great James Bond. I think the movies don't do him justice, but I think GoldenEye is great.
Sure. And again, I think it was back to sort of classic sort of Bond type thing. Like the tank chase scene is a big scene. That we hadn't seen something like that for certainly in the two Timothy Dalton films, even before that, really.
And it's outlandish, but it works. That's what's so great about James Bond. Like, who else drives a tank down Russia?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, it's Russia now, and the kind of the Russians are the kind of bad guys, and it's kind of a post Cold War sort of thing, but it harks back to much earlier Bonds.
Yeah.
So you're in safe territory, aren't you? It's kind of like it's not so different of a change. Again, I remember thinking, they were pretty good. Again, I suppose one thing that I was always slightly unsure of is because again they didn't seem to the gadget thing, which they did develop later on, but they didn't go as hard as say like the Roger Moore stuff. So it
Not
was
at first.
Yeah. But I think they were still kind of almost like trying to compete.
GoldenEye really only has the pen, I believe, pretty much, right? So, but I gotta say, the pen is a great one. It's a classic one that they kind of go to. I think it's one of the few ones that the audience really knows it. They set it up really well, and it comes at a time where it like kicks us off into the final action set piece in a way. So, but yeah, it's a little bit more tame. Kind of like how in the Daniel Craig ones, we don't even really get gadgets till Spectre. Really, I mean, we get Q and like a little bit in Skyfall, but like we don't really get any gadgets till later on. But yeah, so I like GoldenEye. I think it's my favorite of the Pierce Brosnan ones. I think the order they came out more or less is the order. Like I do, Tomorrow Never Dies, I think is an underrated movie. I do enjoy that movie quite a bit.
It's interesting because that gets a lot of not flack, but I think it gets forgotten about a little bit. Kind of get lost. Again, Tomorrow Never Dies. I probably kind of remember that maybe the least of the Pierce Brosnan Bonds. What's your thoughts on that? I'm trying to remember what the bad guy
is. Jonathan Pierce.
That's right. Yes.
He's a
And
media mogul.
yeah, which I suppose is quite apt for today, perhaps, that
Yeah.
maybe it was just a little bit too early, that if that was the sort
I
of
think
bad
he,
guy
he he
now.
plays it a little heightened, but overall, I mean, it's a fun
Yeah,
movie. It's actually really well paced. It's shorter than the other ones.
yeah,
It's got a lean. I think it actually, as an action film, like if you were just to look at it as a pure action movie, I think it's the best action movie of the Pierce Brosnan ones, possibly
yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of like runtime and like what they have in the set piece. There's like the back seat where he's driving in the car, the big chase with Michelle Yeoh where they're driving on the motorcycle bike, and they
That's
jump
true.
over the
Yeah,
helicopter and they're like hanging off the side of the building.
yeah,
And the opening sequence is like him with the fighter jet fighting the other guy. And I mean, it's
that's right.
definitely
Yeah.
it's a fun movie, but and I will say what I liked about it and watching them all this time, because World Is Not Enough has a more interesting storyline, I would argue, and plot, way more depth to it. But the filmmaking of World Is Not Enough is not anywhere near as interesting. Everything is so wide. The lens choices are the same. The cutting pattern is standard. But in Tomorrow Never Dies, it gets a lot of extreme close-ups, gets a lot of interesting
Mm.
angles, a lot of Dutch. They're definitely playing more with the 90s fun of moving the camera and tone and action. And World Is Not Enough is the plot's more interesting, but it plays, the filmmaking in it is too safe and
Do you think they would?
tempered.
Do you think they were very aware of, say, now the Mission Impossible films had kind of been established, and maybe the Bourne films were sort of coming into, and there've been lots of other films,
Yeah.
like True Lies, for example, and they were trying to just making sure that they were keeping
Yeah.
up with
I mean, I
sort
think it
of,
looks like that. Like, I think Tomorrow Never Dies is definitely hokier a little bit than GoldenEye. And I think
mm,
it's definitely less hokey than World Is Not Enough, but I think it's more entertaining than World Is Not Enough and more fun. I think World Is Not Enough definitely is trying to be more, so it's almost a product, like a test for Skyfall. It's actually the writers
yeah,
from World Is Not Enough on, the same, they've written all the James Bond movies, but they've been co-writers on every James Bond
mm,
movie, that pair. And it's they capture M. I like that M has a bigger storyline. I mean, we didn't really talk about that. Judi Dench appears in these movies, and she's freaking great. Like her
that
scene in
that's true.
GoldenEye,
Yeah,
even that first scene where she like, you're a misogynist dinosaur, and they have that whole like it's just a great banter between them, and she has such a weight to her. Like you fully, I mean, the other
mm,
M was always great, but he's just a guy behind a desk. You just,
yeah,
he just that's all he is. But M is active. She's standing, she's doing stuff, and like I buy that M is the person in the room making the decision to shoot
yeah,
the nuke down, to shoot this down, to send that person. And there's not, I don't think a single person questions Judi Dench like as the person in power. And I
yes.
think it's such a great contrast, and it makes the character event so much deeper than it ever was before. It's fun. That's why they had to keep her for Casino Royale, even though it's like a reboot. They're like, no, because we carry over that emotion still when
Well,
we go to
it
Daniel Craig from those films.
it is interesting how continuity is more important now, because yeah, why wouldn't you keep her? If anything, that's even more, whether it was a conscious decision or not. But the head of MI6 would, in many cases, be constant, and it will be the agent that changes.
Yeah,
So yeah, like the chain of command, people at the top would be the same for a very very long period of time. So it made sense that they kept her. But you're right, she was probably the most important addition to Bond in the franchise, because you're right, because not only is she fantastic actress and performer, but yeah, she gives the depth of it, and very much a counterpoint to Bond, as into back and forth and that sort of thing. And you're right, it's a precursor to the Craig films, because even the Pierce Brosnan is kind of not flirting with her as such, but yeah, they do have a dynamic, don't they? It is not just like, sure, I'll go and do this, and he
yeah,
goes and does the mission. Um, the I guess maybe again, it was a very busy period of time cinematically in sort of the late 90s. A lot was going on. You've got films like The Matrix coming out and everything else,
hmm
and maybe it mirrored a little bit of where they were with some of the Connery, sorry, not the Connery, the Roger Moore ones, where they just weren't quite sure of what to do next
yeah,
to keep relevant. It almost felt like the stakes were like really really high, and they had to almost turn it into more of a sort of gimmicky sort of thing, like the very final Pierce Brosnan one with the sort of the invisible car and all that sort of thing. I think again a lot of people didn't like that. I think it was taking like the good elements of like the submarine car and stuff like that, but just kind of being lazy with it, and
yeah, I mean, I think that Die Another Day is a it's just kind of a fault of that time period. I think a lot of movies in the early 2000s, the ones that weren't fantasy based, everything is cool and extreme. Like even Mission Impossible 2 is like Limp Bizkit does the soundtrack. Like we don't need regular music. We need Limp Bizkit to do it, And there's Triple X coming out, and it's like the Fast and Furious, and everything is extreme, and the X Games are popular, and skateboarding. So it was kind of got stuck into that again, picking what's popular at the moment, and that's what happened in Die Another Day. But real quick, before jumping into that, I just wanted to mention back to World's Not Enough. My favorite part of that is the boat chase in the beginning.
Yes,
I do know that the girl is the villain. I think that she's I can't ever pronounce her. Sophie. I can't pronounce her name. I feel bad. But the French actress from Braveheart, she's fantastic.
Yeah,
and she's great and everything. And it's great to see her. Like I think it's a good twist. It's actually like I think because you've seen so many films, it makes you stop and think like, wait, has there not been a female Bond villain? And on top of that, like, is it so blatant who's good or bad? And I think they do a good job of like masking that. But last thing I wanted to say was just that David Arnold, this composer, he came in at Tomorrow Never Dies, and he does the last 3 Brosnans, and he does the first 2 Daniel Craig films. He's absolutely fantastic. David Arnold destroys it. The music in all those films is some of the most energetic music you will ever listen to for any movie. Like the tempo, the pace of it, the way he is able to incorporate every single sound and theme you've heard in a Bond movie, but interlay it like those action chase music is just amazing. Like it's really spectacular. Like he's probably my favorite Bond composer, and it goes all the way through. I mean, Casino Royale's got amazing music too, but we'll get there.
He does, yeah.
No, so the third one, and the villain, of course, is has this he can't feel pain, which is kind of funny, kind of interesting, but that's it. And then Die Another Day, I will say though, like Moonraker, I don't love him. I don't know. I'm not gonna say that, but like I enjoy some of Die Another Day. Like I like the first act, and then it has its moments. Like I gotta be honest, I think the hovercraft chase in the beginning is awesome. Like I also saw it as a kid in theaters, and the music is fantastic. But like it's a hovercraft chase. Where else do you see that? I've never seen a big hovercraft chase in the movie. I see a car chase every spy film. I never see anyone on hovercrafts running around. So like that's James Bond. Like James Bond in a nutshell. Like no, it's not a car chase. This is a hovercraft chase, and it's like okay, I'm in it. And the guy's got diamonds in his face. Like I love that.
Yeah. Do you think maybe that obviously that is the fun element of Bond, but do you think maybe that they need to be more aware of that when they're coming up with scripts and coming up with premises, and they're like, we could just do another car chase, but no, come on,
like, listen, the hovercraft's not the problem with that movie. I mean, I think him surfing a tsunami Antarctic CGI wave maybe is more of an issue, right? Like there's a lot of other problems before it's so funny. Like you can't even imagine like watching that plot. Now the plot of that movie, the villain literally turns himself from Asian to white. That's literally the plot of the movie, which is just like kind of hilarious. Like you can't even imagine that happened, but it is but it's interesting because it's kind of like a Diamonds Are Forever mentioning plot because they can change faces. And if you actually talk about the making of that, they said they have references to all 20 Bond movies and all 20 plots. And if you watch it, you can pick up on all these things. Jinx thing is supposed to be a Goldfinger reference with the lasers. There's just kind of all these little homages to like each Bond film. And you're like, oh, okay. But no, overall, not that good. I will say I probably tied with The World Is Not Enough for me. Maybe I like it slightly more because it's more fun, even though it's outlandish. And maybe I had a big crush on Halle Berry as a kid, but the first 2 Pierce Brosnan ones are definitely good.
No, I'm with you. And again, it's very much of its time, which it's interesting, isn't it? Because early noughties films do very much have a feel about them, don't they? As you said, that if it comes from the music, like Limp Bizkit, it's the Triple X and all those sort of films. It's it can't escape that which obviously, yeah, doesn't make it timeless. And it'd be interesting in another sort of 10 years if we look back at the Craig films, if that's aged any better. I think it probably will, but
I don't think the Craig films are aging really at all. I think that like Casino Royale works just as well today as it did
yeah,
then.
it does. Again, I've seen it recently, and yeah, you wouldn't know that wasn't made in the last 3 years, really.
Yeah.
Again, I think again possibly more so now because they've had so many goes at it, and they're in the process of doing it now. It's almost like felt that, yeah, because I think Pierce Brosnan was generally well received as Bond. I don't remember them being any massive problem with it. I think
No, I think people didn't like the movie so as much, but I think people liked him as James Bond.
yeah, and I think at to that point, Die Another Day was the highest grossing Bond pre Casino Royale. Whether that's because of inflation or just because people liked it.
In America, Die Another Day actually sold more tickets than Casino Royale.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, even though it's not the best of the Bonds for lots of reasons.
They've actually been stop talking. Sorry, but talking about American box office, you actually look from the Brosnan era through Daniel Craig. They're pretty much like Skyfall's an outlier where it made a little bit more, but their ticket sales are pretty consistent. Like in America, technically, Pierce Brosnan is as popular as Daniel Craig. Like in terms of how much they each make, like Bond seems seemingly as popular as he's been.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Again, Pierce Brosnan was quite big in America. He was on TV and everything else, arguably bigger than Daniel Craig as an actor.
Yeah, I think he was more. I didn't think people really knew Daniel Craig as an actor outside of James Bond until around Skyfall. I really do. I really think it wasn't until post Skyfall that people were like, "Oh, Daniel Craig, like this is." I think before that he's just that guy who played James Bond. When I think Pierce Brosnan was, doing a lot more other things. I think in the '90s, and people knew him for something else.
Yeah, I don't know how big Layer Cake was in America.
No one saw it in America. It's like an indie movie here.
Yeah, I mean it's a great film.
Great.
Yeah. And obviously now Knives Out was big and the sequel to that. Other again to go off part, I think Daniel Craig as an actor is really, really good, and Logan Lucky, I think it's a great film. He's very good
Logan
at that.
Lucky, yeah.
But yeah, that's an interesting insight because you kind of just assume that Daniel Craig is massive everywhere because of Bond, but as I said,
he's huge,
because of Bond, yeah. Excuse me.